be learning this week all about intermittent fasting and how it's going to help you get to your goals. Now, intermittent fasting, if you don't know, is a window of time when you eat and the window of time when you don't eat. Now, things that can go wrong with intermittent fasting. Now, the first meal that you start off your day will either break your fast in the right way or break it in the wrong way. And a lot of the food combinations that you make will either decide whether you store fat or you lose fat. So if we don't break our fast properly, what could happen to you is you're going to get metabolic slowdown. Okay, you're going to have hormonal issues, and then you're going to get more belly fat. So let's learn how to do this correctly. Okay, mistake number one, you guys, is breaking your fast the wrong way, combining the wrong foods together. And a lot of people have a misconception like, oh, I've been fasting all night, so I can eat whatever I want first thing in the morning. Your insulin response is so sensitive and you really don't want to mess it up. So, the worst combination that you can make is carbs by themselves or carbs and fat. Why carbs and fat? Well, you need to understand that because insulin is super sensitive, now you're eating carbohydrates, which spikes up the insulin very high, and that causes that dietary fat to be stored as body fat much easier than if you were to have, say, protein and fat, or if you were to have just protein and carbohydrates. That is a better combination of foods to start with your fast breaking. So, good examples would be something like a protein shake with peanut butter, or something like eggs, like a lot of eggs with, say, one slice of bread, right? Or, for example, if you're breaking your fast like later in the afternoon, then a big chicken salad, right, with maybe a little bit of chickpeas or something like that. So, making sure that your protein is high enough to really calm down that insulin, but you're not combining that high carb, high fat combination. So that is like the most damaging meal that you could actually break your fast with. So don't make that mistake. Okay, mistake number two is you're over snacking in between your main meals. And this is the big problem because what you need to understand is you're really derailing everything that you've done in your fasting time. So when you're fasting, you're sleeping at night and you're fasting for more than 10 hours, what ends up happening is your body starts to use fat as a source of fuel because it doesn't have any glucose in the system. But if you break your fast, say correctly, but then B are snacking a lot in between your meals, you're increasing insulin every single time. So every time that you increase insulin, you are signaling to your body, why would I use stored fat as a source of fuel when this person is just constantly feeding me when I can just use the glucose as energy? So you're never really tapping into those fat cells all day long. So you definitely want like two big opportunities is fasting, your long hours when you're sleeping until you break your fast the next day. And then you also want to take the opportunity of tapping into your fat cells between main meals. So you want to shoot anywhere between like 3 or 4 hours between your main meals. Also, too, if you can try to keep your meals at the same time every day, this is great for the body. The body really likes rhythm and momentum and a routine and structure. When your body realizes that you're, say, having your first meal at, say, 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever the time is that you're doing, and you repeat that on a daily basis, your body knows exactly like what is the threshold. Like, okay, so I'm getting hungry. She hasn't eaten. Okay, well, she's eating at 11. The next day, it's like, okay, I'm not so hungry. I know food's coming at 11. I can wait. I can wait. And so you really train your body on knowing when food is coming in. But if your meals are sporadic everywhere all the time, it's going to be really difficult for you to control those hunger hormones. So it's okay if you do that every now and then. That's not a big deal. It's not a problem. But at first, when you want to adapt your hormones to intermittent fasting, you want to try to keep a tight schedule on that. Number three, over fasting is one of the biggest mistakes, and this is the mistake that I made apart from not having the right meals at the right time. So, over fasting, thinking more is better. And a lot of people who are advocates of fasting are usually men, and men don't really understand that women hormones dictate a lot on how our bodies respond to a diet. So, especially when it comes to intermittent fasting, if you're a woman and you're fasting more than 14 hours, this is really hitting the danger mark. This is where your hormones after a week or two are going to start to decline. Your body's going to start to feel malnourished because you're not getting enough nutrients within that feeding time. And then your body actually starts doing the opposite of what happened to me. My hunger just went up the roof. I couldn't control myself. And then not on top of that, I started gaining more body fat. And so this happens because your body is looking at this as a starvation mode. You're fasting way too long for your hormonal balance or what your hormones can take. And then therefore your body goes into survival mode and takes that food, what are all the foods that you eat, and just stores it as fat because it doesn't know when the next meal is going to be, even if you were to eat in a regular schedule. It's just way too long. So try not to overfast. Don't make that mistake. You're not men. Women are not little men. So make sure that you do not follow a man's plan. And if your husband is doing this with you, that's great, but his fasting window is completely different than yours. So please understand that the structure is different for women than it is for men. The other thing too is you don't want that cortisol to increase, and this is what happens too when you fast for too long is your stress level increases very high, and that stress level also makes you pack on more fat than just insulin alone. So signs of malnutrition when you're not getting enough food in that waiting window are things like hair loss, muscle loss, fatigue, poor sleeping, depression, and lack of concentration. And this is a big, big problem because what ends up happening is this all lowers your metabolism, meaning that if you're eating less because you're like really crunching your time and trying to fast for a longer period of time, and that means you have less opportunity to get all the nutrients that your body needs to require just living, functioning, and then if you're exercising on top of it, and then you start to lose muscle. The more muscle that you lose means that your metabolism will drop, means that every single time you want to lose another pound, another 2 pounds, that means you have to reduce your calories more and more and more. Because if you don't have enough muscle in your body, it just means that you're not efficient in fuel, means that you have to reduce your nutrient level just to get that weight off. But having enough muscle in your body increases your metabolism and it allows you to store more glucose, which is broken down food particles, into your muscle. They're like lockers. But if the only lockers that you have in your body is fat cells, then that's where a lot of the food is going to be storing, right? And so it's going to be really difficult for you to lose that body fat because as soon as that fat cell goes in, as soon as that fat is formed in your fat cell, it is ridiculously difficult to get rid of it. You know this. You've been on many programs. You know how hard it is to lose weight, but it's so easy to gain it. Okay, so you make sure that in your window time that you are eating very high dense nutrient food, so high protein, leafy greens, getting the best of nature. Don't get your carbohydrates from packaged foods, from things that are not going to fill you up and keep you hungry and then keep you malnourished on top of it, because your program is not going to last very long this way. Okay, so mistake number 4 is not lifting weights when you are doing intermittent fasting or regardless of anything. It doesn't even mean intermittent fasting, it means any type of health program that you're trying to go after. One of the biggest things is that weightlifting, especially after the age of 40, is so vitally important for us because at the age of 35, we start losing muscle at a very quick rate. Now, when we lose muscle, you have to understand that you're losing a lot of things along with just muscle loss. You're losing longevity, you're losing your youth. So the less and less muscle that we have more wrinkles. We can't hold our collagen in our skin. We look older. This is why a lot of people who train a lot or work out or in the fitness world, they look so much younger than what they actually are. And it's because they are supplying nutrients to that muscle, which is longevity. It's just really what keeps you young. And so also too, what happens is that when you're in a fat loss program, the only way that your body will use more fat as fuel versus muscle. So a lot of people lose muscle and fat at the same time, which is common, but you only want to lose a little bit of muscle, and that's okay. You want to lose more fat, but some people lose more fat than muscle, and the reason why is because they don't have enough muscle. And so when you don't have enough muscle, you burn about the same amount of fat with muscle when you're losing weight or more so. So the way that you protect that is by strength training. The more you strength train, the more you drive your body to use fat as a source of fuel. This is why it's very important. It should be part of your program. So hopefully that has changed your mind if you were thinking of not doing the strength training program. Okay, reason number 5, and one of the most surprising, and I know you guys have heard this, like, don't eat before your bedtime. Don't, you're gonna get fat if you eat. Well, it's not necessarily that you're gonna get fat if you eat, and if you do eat close to your bedtime every now and then, it's not a massive oops, but there is some science behind this that maybe you will appreciate. So what happens is when we're close to our bedtime, about maybe 2 hours before going to sleep, your body recognizes that it's going to be sleep time soon because you have created kind of like a pattern, right, of when you go to bed. So your body says, okay, we're going to get ready to go to sleep. We're going to produce melatonin, which is your sleep hormone. Well, melatonin actually blocks insulin. So you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that's a great thing because that means if I don't spike up insulin, that means I'm not storing any fat. Well, not necessarily, because what ends up happening is because it blocks insulin and if there's food coming in, your body has to use insulin to actually store the food, or your bloodstream is going to be flooded with sugar, which is extremely dangerous. Um, so what ends up happening is your body does eventually start producing insulin, but at a very, very slow rate, way slower than if melatonin was not in the way. So the scenario with this is that you think that you started fasting, say at 10 o'clock, because that's when you stopped eating, but you're in bed at 10:30 and falling asleep at 11. Well, you really didn't fast at 10 o'clock. You really started fasting at 2 in the morning, because it's going to take your body about 2 or 3 hours to process that food effectively, because the insulin response is so much at a slower response. So you want to kind of scale back a little bit and say, okay, so what do I want to do? I want to make sure that I finish my last meal minimum 2 hours before going to bed. And if you can push it back 3 hours, I know it's hard for a lot of people. That's hard for me because, like my window of eating time is very difficult. So I try to keep it to 2 hours, and it really does make a difference. So try to do those things. Try not to do those 5 mistakes, and you will see that your fasting and intermittent fasting results is going to be so much smoother, and you're going to see how amazing intermittent fasting can really be when you apply the right things and avoid the 5 things that we talked about here. Okay, you guys, that's it.